Are electric vehicles actually worse for the environment than gas cars? That claim is everywhere right now, and it's convincing a lot of people. I'm Bo Kaufman, and this is the Sanity Project. So I put this argument to the test. Two perspectives, Alexandra Ives and David Mercer, going head-to-head on the facts. Listen to this.
So, if I handed you a 6-pound gallon of liquid, right, and I told you that setting it on fire would magically create 20 pounds of invisible garbage, you would probably tell me my math is fundamentally broken.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can't just turn 6 pounds of something into 20 pounds of something else just by burning it.
Right, it completely defies the laws of physics, or at least it feels like it does.
Yeah, it really does. But that bizarre kind of mind-bending math is exactly what your car does every single time you drive it.
Which is just wild to think about. And we are going to get into that chemistry today because it sits right at the center of a massive debate.
A very loud debate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've been to a dinner party recently or spent any time reading the comments under a news article, you have definitely heard someone drop this very specific argument. The one that goes, aren't electric vehicles just as bad, if not worse, for the environment because of all the battery mining?
Oh, yeah. You hear that everywhere. It sounds incredibly convincing, too.
It does. It has this ring of, forbidden truth to it.
Yeah.
So for this deep dive, our mission is to unpack this. We're digging through a massive stack of sources today.
A huge stack.
Yeah, we've got data from the Union of Concerned Scientists, the EPA, Amnesty International, BC Hydro, and Redwood Materials. Just trying to figure out if that dinner party talking point is actually true.
And, to get a real answer for you, to protect you from falling for a half-truth, we can't just look at a car the day it rolls off the dealership lot.
Right, you need the full picture.
Exactly. Environmental scientists use this framework called a cradle-to-grave life cycle analysis. So that means weighing the upfront environmental cost of building the machine against the daily, unavoidable reality of running that machine over, say, a 10 to 15-year lifespan.
Okay, let's unpack this from the very beginning. Let's start with the cradle part because, the skeptics actually have a really strong point here.
They do, yeah.
If we look purely at the manufacturing process, electric vehicles start their lives in a pretty deep environmental hole.
They absolutely do. Building an electric car is an incredibly resource-intensive undertaking. I mean, raw materials have to be extracted from the earth, heavily refined, and then manufactured into these really complex components.
And the big differentiator is the battery.
Exactly. The massive difference between an EV and a traditional gas car is that lithium-ion battery pack. These packs are heavy, they're complex, and they require just an immense amount of energy to forge.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the life cycle data here from the Union of Concerned Scientists, and the numbers are honestly jarring.
What do they show for the baseline?
Well, if you build a standard mid-sized electric vehicle, so something with a fairly modest 84-mile range, the manufacturing process alone produces about 15% more emissions than building a comparable gasoline-powered car.
Right. And, that gap gets substantially wider depending on consumer preferences.
How much wider?
Well, if you want one of those long-range EVs, like the heavy-duty models that get over 250 miles on a single charge, the manufacturing emissions can be up to 68% higher than a gas car.
Wow. 68% higher before you even drive it.
Before the tires ever touch the pavement. I mean, the gigafactories that produce these batteries use these massive ovens to bake and dry the chemical slurries.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they require huge amounts of electricity and heat just to stabilize the materials.
So it's a bit like deciding between a heavy-duty reusable metal water bottle and a flimsy single-use plastic bottle.
That's a great way to think about it.
Because it takes way more energy to mine the steel, run the blast furnace, and shape that heavy reusable thermos than it does to just, stamp out a thin piece of plastic.
Yeah.
So if we literally stop the clock on day 0, the gasoline car actually looks like the greener piece of machinery. Am I wrong?
No, you're exactly right. And what's fascinating here is that critics of electric vehicles almost always stop the clock exactly there.
Right.
They take a snapshot of the manufacturing process, isolate the battery mining, and just declare the EV a total failure.
But a car's life cycle is a moving picture, not a still photograph.
Precisely. The metal water bottle analogy is perfect because the whole point of enduring that heavy upfront manufacturing cost is what happens on day 2, day 3, and day 3000.
Right, you're reusing it.
Exactly. You have to compare using that metal bottle every single day for years against the environmental cost of manufacturing a brand new plastic bottle every single morning.
Which brings us back to that broken math from the very beginning of our conversation.
Ah, yes. The ongoing burn.
Let's look at the daily reality of driving a gasoline car. Because the EPA data outlining what actually comes out of a tailpipe is just staggering.
It really is. I think the daily toll of an internal combustion engine is so normalized that we just become completely blind to the scale of it.
Totally. So the EPA calculates the typical passenger vehicle, assuming it gets about 22 miles to the gallon and drives an average of 11,500 miles a year, emits 4.6 metric tons of carbon dioxide every single year.
4.6 metric tons, that's massive.
And the math behind that is what I want to dig into. The EPA states that burning just 1 gallon of gasoline creates 8,887 grams of tailpipe CO2.
Right.
So for anyone trying to visualize that, a gallon of gas only weighs about 6 pounds. But burning it produces almost 20 pounds of carbon dioxide gas? How is that physically possible? How does a liquid triple its weight when you set it on fire?
It genuinely bends the mind until you track the molecules. So gasoline is a hydrocarbon. It's primarily composed of carbon and hydrogen atoms chained together.
Okay, carbon and hydrogen.
Right. Now, when you combust that liquid in your car's engine, the intense heat breaks those chemical bonds. The hydrogen atoms separate and bond with oxygen to create water vapor.
Makes sense.
But the carbon atoms shoot out of your tailpipe and violently bond with oxygen molecules from the outside atmosphere.
Wait, so the car is essentially inhaling the surrounding air.
Precisely. And oxygen molecules are surprisingly heavy. Every single carbon atom from your gasoline grabs onto 2 heavy oxygen atoms from the air to create CO2. So the vast majority of the weight of that 20 pounds of pollution doesn't actually come from the tank of gasoline itself. It's the invisible weight of the atmosphere being chemically fused to your fuel.
That paints a really vivid picture. Your engine is basically a high-speed chemical factory, just inhaling heavy oxygen, attaching it to carbon, and blowing out 20 pounds of invisible garbage for every gallon you burn.
That's exactly what it is. And if we connect this localized tailpipe chemistry to the macro picture, it exposes a massive glaring blind spot in the anti-EV argument.
How so?
Because when people criticize the mining required to build an electric vehicle battery, they are completely ignoring the continuous globe-spanning extraction operation required to run a gas car.
I hear that, but gas isn't mined like a solid metal. It's pumped out of the ground as a liquid.
Well, the physical state of the material doesn't make the extraction any less devastating.
Fair point.
Think about the mechanical reality of producing that single gallon of gasoline. Geologists have to fire seismic blasts into the ocean floor just to find the crude oil. Massive offshore rigs drill miles beneath the Earth's crust to pump it out. That crude liquid is loaded onto supertankers that cross oceans, burning heavy bunker fuel the entire way.
And then it has to be refined.
Exactly. It's pumped into sprawling coastal refineries where it's boiled in distillation columns. Then it's loaded onto fleets of diesel trucks just to reach the underground tank at your local gas station.
And that entire sequence has to happen just so you can burn that 1 gallon in a matter of, 30 miles?
That is the crucial distinction. That immense supply chain isn't a one-time event. You have to do all of that relentlessly every single week for the entire 10 to 15-year lifespan of that vehicle.
Wow.
So the dinner party argument fails because it compares EV mining to zero mining. The reality is comparing a one-time battery extraction to a 15-year-long marathon of relentless oil extraction, refining, and combustion.
So that sets up a pretty intense collision course on the life cycle graph. The EV starts in an emissions hole because of the heavy manufacturing process.
Right.
But the gas car is digging its own hole deeper and deeper every single time you press the accelerator.
Exactly.
So the obvious question for you, the listener, is when do those lines cross? When does the EV pay off its initial carbon debt?
Well, the Union of Concerned Scientists life cycle data maps this out very clearly. Nationwide, on average, an electric vehicle pays off its manufacturing carbon debt surprisingly fast.
Like how fast?
Typically, it takes about 1.5 years of driving.
Really? Just 1.5 years?
Yeah. And if you buy a smaller EV with a short-range battery, it can offset the extra manufacturing emissions in just 6 months.
That's incredibly fast.
Even if you buy a massive long-range battery, the absolute maximum time it takes to break even is about 3 years.
3 years maximum out of a vehicle that will be on the road for well over a decade.
Exactly. And by the end of their functional lives, the data shows that gas-powered cars spew out roughly twice as much global warming pollution as an equivalent electric car. And importantly, that average includes EVs charging in regions where the local electricity grid is still heavily reliant on burning coal or natural gas.
Which brings us to the Canadian context. Because the source material we have from BC Hydro presents a scenario that just completely obliterates that average math.
Oh, absolutely. British Columbia operates on a radically different energy paradigm.
Yep, it really does.
It serves as a perfect test case for the true environmental ceiling of electric vehicles.
So the Clean BC Roadmap details how the electricity generated in the province comes almost entirely from clean, renewable hydropower.
Right, from water.
The grid is essentially driven by the natural flow of water. If you live in British Columbia and you plug your car into the wall in your garage, you are functionally plugging your car into a literal river.
It's amazing.
The mechanical implications of that are wild. The crossover point where the EV beats the gas car must happen in a matter of, weeks.
Yeah, it drops the daily driving emissions effectively to zero. When your power grid is running on renewable hydro, the EV is sprinting past the gas car's carbon footprint almost immediately.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And this highlights a structural advantage of the technology. As electricity grids globally transition away from fossil fuels and toward wind, solar, and hydro, the environmental gap between EVs and gasoline cars will only widen.
Because the grid gets cleaner.
Right. The electric vehicle you buy today actually gets cleaner every single year as the grid it plugs into gets cleaner. A gas car, by its very physical design, will never be cleaner than the day you bought it.
That makes total sense. So the carbon math is heavily, undeniably skewed in favor of the EV.
Yes, it is.
But carbon emissions are only one way to measure the impact of a machine. The environmental math is clear, but the moral math gets incredibly dark when we look at the supply chain.
Yes, we have to address that.
We have an investigation here from Amnesty International that focuses on the mining of cobalt. And cobalt is a critical element used in many lithium-ion batteries.
This raises an important question because we cannot do a genuine life cycle analysis without looking at how these materials are sourced. A low carbon footprint does not automatically equal an ethical footprint.
Exactly. So the Amnesty report details the conditions in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or the DRC. They produced roughly 50% of the world's cobalt.
Right.
And the conditions in many of the artisanal mines there are just brutal.
They are devastating. And we should clarify what that term artisanal means in this context, because I think it obscures the reality on the ground.
Yeah, let's pause right there. Because when I hear the word artisanal, I think of like an overpriced loaf of sourdough bread or a guy hand-carving wooden chairs in some boutique shop. What does an artisanal mine actually look like in the DRC?
Yeah, it is a very sanitized term for unregulated bare hands subsistence digging.
Unregulated subsistence digging.
Right. It means individuals, not heavy machinery or corporate engineering teams, are physically digging holes into the earth. They use basic hand tools, like rebar chisels and plastic sacks, to scrape cobalt out of hand-dug tunnels that frequently collapse.
That is awful. And the numbers Amnesty brings forward are horrifying. Based on UNICEF estimates, around 40,000 children were working in these mines in 2014.
It's heart-wrenching.
They interviewed a 14-year-old orphan named Paul, who started mining at age 12. He described spending up to 24 hours at a time down in these unventilated hand-dug tunnels, earning between $1 and $2 a day.
24 hours underground.
Yeah. And the miners have no protective gear, no gloves, no respirators. They suffer severe lung damage from inhaling the dust, and Amnesty documented at least 80 fatal tunnel collapses in just one 15-month window.
It is a severe human rights crisis, and it persists because the global supply chain is engineered to be intentionally opaque.
So how exactly does a piece of rock, chiseled out of a tunnel by a 14-year-old, end up inside a brand new, pristine vehicle from a massive global brand like Volkswagen or a phone from Apple or Samsung? Like, how does it get laundered?
Well, it happens through a network of middlemen.
Okay.
A miner like Paul pulls the cobalt ore from the earth and washes it in a local river. He sells it to a local trader who transports it to an open market.
Right.
At that market, the hand-dug cobalt is purchased by larger buying houses, where it is physically mixed in giant warehouses with cobalt extracted from large regulated industrial mines.
So they blend it.
Exactly. Once the materials are mixed, the origin is completely erased. That blended cobalt is then sold to massive mineral processors, like the Chinese giant Huayu Cobalt, who refine it and sell it to the battery manufacturers in South Korea and China.
Who then supply the big brands.
Yes. They finally sell the finished batteries to the global brands. By the time it reaches the car company, the trace of the artisanal miner is entirely gone.
I mean, knowing this makes me want to just hold on to my gas car forever.
It's a very common reaction.
Because at least the engine in my Honda Civic isn't sending a teenager into a collapsing tunnel. I struggle with this. It feels completely hypocritical to champion a technology meant to save the planet when it is being built on the backs of exploited children.
Absolutely.
Doesn't this completely validate the critics who refuse to buy an EV?
It is a profound moral tension, and feeling conflicted about it is really the only appropriate response. What Amnesty International is demanding is absolute corporate accountability. They want human rights due diligence, transparent tracing, and remedial action for the communities harmed.
As they should.
However, we have to recognize a massive logical fallacy that often derails this conversation.
I am struggling to see the fallacy, to be honest. Abandoning the technology feels like the most moral choice.
The fallacy is the assumption that sticking with the internal combustion engine is a bloodless, ethical alternative.
Oh.
It simply trades one devastating global impact for another.
Okay, I see where you're going.
The fossil fuel industry requires continuous daily extraction that causes immense global suffering. From disastrous oil spills that decimate entire coastal economies to geopolitical conflicts and wars fought over access to oil reserves.
Right.
Not to mention the localized smog and air pollution that causes millions of premature respiratory deaths every single year.
And the climate change aspect.
Exactly. The overarching existential threat of climate change disproportionately destroys the livelihoods of the poorest nations on Earth.
So the reality is, we are forced to choose between two heavily industrialized, imperfect systems. Neither option is impact-free.
Exactly. But the critical difference lies in the potential for reform.
How so?
The goal of human rights groups like Amnesty isn't to kill battery technology. The goal is to fix the supply chain. We can legally mandate transparent tracing. We can engineer new battery chemistries that use significantly less cobalt or eliminate it entirely.
Which they already do.
Right. What we cannot do, under any circumstances, is ethicalize the release of 4.6 metric tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere per car, per year. That continuous destruction is fundamentally baked into the physics of burning gasoline.
Which transitions us perfectly to the final piece of this puzzle, because there is a massive technological shift happening right now to address the mining problem at its root.
Yes, there is.
We have data from a company called Redwood Materials, and what they are doing completely flips the concept of extraction on its head.
Redwood Materials represents the necessary evolution from a linear economy to a circular economy. They are doing something that the fossil fuel industry fundamentally cannot replicate.
The linear economy being the way we do things now. We dig up raw metals, forge them into a battery, and eventually, 10 or 15 years later, the battery degrades and dies.
Right, and disposing of that dead battery, much like disposing of an old gas car, produces less than a ton of emissions.
But Redwood isn't focused on throwing things away. They are focused on large-scale domestic battery recycling.
And we need to be clear about what battery recycling actually means in this context, because it is not like recycling cardboard or plastic, which degrades in quality every time you melt it down.
Wait. How does the physical recycling process work, then?
When an EV battery reaches the end of its life, it's sent to a facility where robots carefully dismantle the massive pack. The individual battery cells are then fed into shredders that grind them down into a fine powder.
What's the powder called?
It's known in the industry as black mass.
Black mass, okay.
And that powder contains a mix of graphite, lithium, nickel, cobalt, and copper. Redwood then uses advanced chemical processes, essentially dissolving the powder in acid, to separate and precipitate out the individual elements.
And how much do they get back?
They recover over 95% of the critical battery metals, bringing them back to their pure original state.
Wait, so an electric vehicle battery is essentially a mobile bank vault?
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it.
Because when I burn a tank of gas, the chemical bonds break, the energy is released, and the mass scatters into the atmosphere forever as pollution.
Right, it's gone.
It's totally gone.
Yeah.
But with an EV, once we go through the effort and the environmental cost of digging the lithium and the cobalt out of the earth, the atoms don't disappear when I drive to the grocery store. They just sit in the vault.
Exactly.
And 15 years later, we can just open the vault, pull the pure metal out, and use it to build the exact same battery for the next car.
Yes. It is the ultimate paradigm shift in how we power transportation. By scaling up this kind of robust closed-loop recycling and pairing it with improving battery chemistries, the industry is actively reducing the need for fresh mining.
That's huge.
A gasoline-powered car relies on a system of continuous extraction followed by continuous destruction. The electric vehicle industry is actively building a closed loop.
Let's bring all these moving parts together. We started with the classic dinner party claim. Electric vehicles are just as bad for the environment because of the battery mining. And based on a cradle-to-grave life cycle analysis, that claim is a very clever half-truth that relies on willful blindness.
It completely fixates on the heavy manufacturing at the starting line, while conveniently ignoring the 15-year marathon of oil drilling, refining, and tailpipe emissions required to keep a traditional car moving.
Yeah. I mean, yes, an electric vehicle requires a massive surge of energy to build. And yes, the battery supply chain has severe ethical vulnerabilities that require immediate corporate accountability and reform. We cannot and should not gloss over the human cost.
Absolutely not.
But when you look at the entire lifespan of the machine, especially if you're charging it on a clean grid like Canada's hydropower system, the EV pays off its environmental debt in just a few short years. From that moment on, it leaves the gas car entirely in the dust.
And, knowledge is only valuable when you apply it to the real world. Understanding the mechanics of a true life cycle analysis protects you from being manipulated by isolated statistics. It allows you to look past the clickbait and make informed, pragmatic choices that actually align with your values, rather than abandoning progress just because it isn't absolutely perfect on day one.
Exactly. So the next time you sit behind the wheel of a car, I want you to look at the fuel gauge and mull over this final thought.
Okay, lay it on us.
A gas car demands we drill into the ocean floor tomorrow just to get to work the next day, burning a liquid that scatters into the atmosphere forever. But as battery recycling scales up to an industrial level, we are moving toward a reality where we barely have to mine the earth at all.
It's an amazing prospect.
We are approaching a future where brand new cars are entirely mined from our own local scrapyards, creating a completely closed, impact-free loop of energy that a combustion engine could never even dream of.
It rewrites the rules of transportation entirely.
It really does. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you on the next one.
So here's the reality. Battery mining does have an impact, no question. But when you actually look at the full life cycle, production, use, and emissions over time, the math isn't even close. Gas vehicles pollute every single day they're on the road. EVs don't. In Canada, with our hydro-powered grid, that difference shows up fast, often within the first couple of years. That's the part that keeps getting left out of the conversation. If you want more breakdowns like this, clear, fact-based, and straight to the point, follow the Sanity Project. And if there's a claim you've seen that doesn't quite add up, drop it in the comments. There's a good chance we'll tackle it next.
If you want more facts and less fear, hit subscribe. Check out the next breakdown wherever you're listening or watching. Stay sane, Canada.